You know, we have the sign from Access TV that we can start, but we're going to wait on Mr. Andrews before we start. Okay. And he just walked in. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the October 15th Planning Commission to order. And we will first look at roll. And Crystal's got it. Thank you. So before we start with this more serious business, we're going to turn it over for an award presentation. I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Each year in October for about the last 20 years, the Planning Commission has recognized or wanted to recognize projects in Salina that went above and beyond in the area of landscaping, both as to installation and ongoing maintenance. And the city has had a landscaping ordinance in place since 1994, and most of our projects in the community meet the minimum standards of that ordinance. But the Planning Commission wanted to have an award for excellence for those projects that went over and above. And in the past, we have had awards that we've given out called the Golden Leaf Award that was done in conjunction with the Tree Advisory Board, but they're not able to participate this year. So there were 3 projects that we're wanting to recognize this afternoon, and the first one is in the category of new development, and that is the Foley Equipment property, 225 North Ohio Street. And we have in your program a pretty lengthy explanation of everything that occurred up there at the Foley site. But one thing that we should give Foley Equipment credit for is perseverance and pavement and patience to work through some of the obstacles that they had. They went up there and bought a piece of property, and they wanted to relocate their facilities from North Broadway to a facility they owned on North Ohio, and they went through all the steps to do that in 2001. And in 2002, KDOT came along and wanted to rebuild the North Ohio Street Bridge over I-70, but they didn't want to close it during construction, so they built a new bridge beside the existing bridge. And in order to do that, they acquired property on the west side of Ohio that took up most of Foley's front yard and all of Kenworth Trucking's front yard. And so both Foley and Kenworth had to go back to the drawing board and rework everything. So they were able to do that in 2006. And in 2007, the Planning Commission, along with the City Commission, created what's called the North Ohio Gateway Overlay District, and that was done to address concerns about the appearance of new development on this entryway into the city. And so this overlay district sets out front yard landscaping, parking lot surfacing, and building material requirements that are over and above our base zoning. So Foley came forward with a plan in 2016 to build a new 30,000 square foot facility in this area, and they designed it in accordance with the North Ohio design guidelines. The Planning Commission approved their plans in December, and then they came back in July with some modifications, and the end result was that we have a front yard landscape buffer along Ohio Street, and then a little bit unique for Salina, a landscape buffer area along I-70. And a couple things that are noteworthy about this is that we incorporated concrete display pads into the landscape area, so they serve a dual purpose for Foley. They have enhanced the appearance of the area, but they also have an opportunity to display their inventory out in those areas. And so since this facility has been built and occupied, it's been very well maintained, both the building, grounds, and landscaping. And it's an important entryway into the city. So at this time, we'd like to recognize Foley Equipment and their partners, both designers and installers. And I think we have representatives of the local branch managers here of the Ohio Street facility to receive their award. So we have Lance and Justin. Yeah, we have Lance and Justin here representing the Salina Office of Foley Equipment. And we also, I don't think we have anybody else here present for that project, but they had designers in Kansas City, Missouri that was a landscape architect that came up with the final design, Mr. Wayne Kershoff, and we want to recognize him as well. So our first award goes to Foley Equipment. The second project that we wanted to recognize is in the voluntary category, and this is a project that occurred over on Walnut Street, and we're sorry we don't have before pictures of the property, but I can tell you just from our code enforcement records that this was a frequent complained about site. There was often outdoor salvage material. There was a stray camper and mobile home that appeared on the property. It was in constant state of some form of code enforcement. But in 2015, the property was purchased by Fresh Look LLC, and they had a different vision for the property, and their first step was to take the building on the west and to refurbish it for United Way offices on the first floor and for loft apartments on the second floor. And that is not part of the nomination for today, but we wanted to bring credit for that. The main part of the project we're looking at refers to what's the old creamery building, which is the building that runs east to west that's set off of Walnut Street there. That building was constructed in 1911. It had been vacant for a long time. Fresh Look looked at putting 3 residential apartment units in there. Their plan was presented to the Planning Commission and approved in November 2015. And then they had a change of course where they looked at putting a yoga studio into the middle unit instead of making that an apartment. And the very original plans had a courtyard area for an apartment very similar to what you see with the fencing there to the west. In other words, you would have driven by on Walnut and had a fence out at the sidewalk and then an interior courtyard behind that fence. But with the yoga studio, that area was all opened up. And since there's over 50 feet there between the sidewalk and the building, that provided an opportunity for open space. And so we've got a wooden ground sign, a bench, sidewalks, pavers, and ground cover and xeriscaping in that area. It's kind of created a little island of urban park in the downtown area. And it is complementary with what is at an angle across the street at the Friends of the River offices across the way. And the Planning Commission had previously recognized the Friends of the River offices for their efforts. And so these are complementary to each other. And what they have done here is notable because none of this was required by the city. They were not required to submit a landscape plan or to even landscape this area. So this project was nominated for an award based on the fact that it was done voluntarily by the business and property owners. The property actually changed hands in 2018, and Restore Properties, that owns a number of downtown properties, is now the owner of the property, and they're now completing the final stage with apartments on that unit closest to 4th Street. So we do want to recognize that VZ Nevitt is the owner of the yoga studio. Bob Moeller and Jacob Wilson are the owners of Restore Properties. Mr. Ken Bieberly was the project architecture. We had Bridget Hall helping with the landscape design and Derek Bernhardt with the installation. So we want to recognize those individuals. So this is Mr. Bob Moeller, and he is a representative of Restore Properties, and they have taken on a number of projects downtown, including this one. So. We have Bridget Hall that was involved in the design that you see there in terms of the materials and the layout. And again, this was an entirely voluntary effort by the property owners and the business owner. I don't think we have we do have Mr. Bernhardt here representing Naturescape Lawn and Landscape, and they were the installers. So this was a multi-group that worked on this. We want to give them all recognition. Thank you. Our final nominee, the Planning Commission indicated a few years ago that they didn't want to limit this strictly to landscaping. They were also interested in recognizing projects that just improved a property's curb appeal or appearance from the street that was not necessarily limited just to landscaping. So we have this building that's at the southwest corner of Westchester Drive in South Ohio. That building was built in 1977 by Bolin Williams Realty. And it started out as a pharmacy with a U-shaped driveway coming off of Ohio and some angled parking in front. And then it became a Domino's carry-out pizza establishment. Then it became a yogurt shop. Then it was Little Caesars Pizza. Then in 2000, Jim's Pharmacy relocated out of Maury Clinic to this location. And in 2013, it was remodeled again into offices for a financial institution. So you may have seen the new bank that is open at the northwest corner of Clouden, Ohio. That's an Exchange Bank. Exchange Bank is out of Buffalo, Nebraska. They previously owned this property, and they sold it to Credit Union of America. But Credit Union of America didn't just move into the building. They proceeded to make a number of improvements to the exterior entrance, installed new roofing, replaced paving and sidewalks. And so this is one where we have some before and after photos. And so as part of the project, they did replace some landscaping along Ohio, increase the number of plantings. One thing that's notable is they put some planting beds right in front of the building. They also had kind of an ADA ramp coming out that extended like 20, 30 feet in front of the building. That was eliminated and turned sideways. And then they put the new portico on the front of the building, which is very distinctive. And in addition to that, they managed to retain the mature trees that are along Westchester Drive there, which adds to the appearance. So we think these modifications to the exterior of the building, the new pavement, curbing, the refreshed landscaping, none of these things were required by the city or by any ordinance. They were choices that Credit Union of America made to enhance the property. And Ohio Street is a heavily traveled and visible corridor, and this really enhances curb appeal along Ohio. So we want to recognize Mr. Ken Nowlin, who's the branch manager, Salina. They used Justin Graham as the architect on the project. Ponton Construction was the general contractor. And Matt Wagner of Landscape Consultants was involved with the design and installation. So we do have a plaque for Ken. Yeah. You could give him one for the architect too. So we want to thank Credit Union of America for what they've done to approve curb appeal along South Ohio. conclude our presentations for 2019, and as always, we welcome suggestions from planning commissioners or the public about other projects in the community that you think are deserving of recognition. So we thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Yes, and with everything going on in the city, I think we'll have more and more nominations as years, in the coming years. So now we'll move on to the business part of our meeting and looking for approval of the last meeting minutes from October 1st.
I move that we approve the meetings.
I second
Minutes.
that.
Any discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say no. Okay, minutes are approved. So now we'll move on to new business, public hearing items. We'll first look at application Z19-7A filed by Jeremy Forshee on behalf of JLF Properties, LLC, requesting a change in zoning district classification from RS Residential Suburban to PC6, which is planned heavy commercial, on a 1/2 acre unplatted tract of land located on the north side of Beverly Drive west of Broadway Boulevard. The property that is the subject of this rezoning application is addressed as 1430 Beverly Drive, and this is continued from a June 18 meeting to allow the application to be converted to planned commercial district.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This, if you recall, there was an original application filed by the applicant who purchased this property in February 2019. It's the site of a residential rental dwelling and outbuilding. It hadn't been occupied for some time, and the applicant purchased the property with the idea of removing the existing dwelling and garage from the property and constructing a new commercial storage building on the site. C6 zoning was requested because C6 zoning is a district that allows construction of commercial storage buildings, and the adjacent property to the west is zoned C6. So to avoid any kind of spot zoning, staff recommended that Mr. Forshee seek C6 zoning. In addition, the property had never been platted, and so as a companion item, Mr. Forshee filed an application to plat this 1/2 acre parcel into a single lot subdivision. The property on both sides of it have historically been used for residential dwellings, but the applicant does not believe this property is suitable for continued residential use. On June 18th, you held a public hearing about a request to rezone this to C6. There was lots of discussion about other C6 uses that could potentially be allowed on this property. Some of the nearby residents expressed concern about other commercial properties that had started out as one thing and changed to another commercial use. And that is something that's permitted without review or approval by the planning commissioner of the city, is that if you have one commercial use of the property and you shift to another use that's also permitted in that district, that does not require any special approval. So the planning commission looked at this and they determined that using planned commercial zoning would allow Mr. Forshee to meet his stated intent while prohibiting the use of the property for other commercial purposes. You thought that review and approval of a site plan was a relevant consideration in reviewing and evaluating the rezoning request, and you felt that planned commercial was needed to maintain good land use relationships with the other development on Beverly Drive. The City Commission agreed with the Planning Commission on that matter, and they directed the applicant to amend his application from C6 to Plan C6, which meant preparing and submitting a site development plan for concurrent review as part of the rezoning request. So those have now been synced up together. It's been set for a public hearing at today's meeting. Neighboring property owners were notified by mail of the new hearing date and received copies of the applicant's plans. So we now have an amended application. The plan is to construct a 3,600 metal storage building on the site where the house is currently located. A copy of those plans is attached to your report, and this is a depiction of that on the screen. And so what Mr. Forshee is proposing as part of his Phase 1 is a 45 by 80 foot building that would replace the existing building on the property, and he is also on the plan showing a potential Phase 2, which would be a 66 foot addition onto that building. So as part of this process, you have the ability to review, request revisions to, and to attach conditions of approval to any site development plan submitted by applicants. You also have the discretion to recommend deletion of potentially incompatible commercial uses from the planned commercial district. So I think we've given you a summary as it stands based on the Planning Commission's comments before. The planned commercial district would consist of indoor storage of personal items and equipment, plus any other permitted uses you might approve as part of your action today. We pointed out that there are a lot of similarities between C5 and C6, but that there are few uses that are allowed in C6 that aren't currently allowed in C5. One of those being warehouses as a conditional use, but other uses like lumber yards, manufactured homes, sales lots, things of that nature are permitted in C6 but not in C5. Non-climatized storage is allowed in C5 and C6. So as we noted, the applicant does not wish to rehabilitate the dwelling on this property, and he doesn't see it as desirable for any residential redevelopment. It's truly a mixed-use area on the north side of Beverly Drive, while the south side is predominantly residential. Most of those homes are 30-plus years old, if not older, and there's only been one home built in that area in the last 30 years, and that was a rebuild of an existing home. And so when we look at the north side of Beverly Drive, I don't know if we can show the zoning pattern, Dustin, but you can see as you look at this area, if you start at the west, you've got the Moose Lodge, which is out of the picture, which is Plan C5. And then you've got a row of single-family rental housing. Then you've got a former auto repair business that's now used as a church. Then you have some single-family homes. Then you have a monument company. And then you have some commercial businesses closer to Broadway. And then in behind you have contractors' offices and other commercial buildings. And so the lots on the north side are deeper than the south side. They have a more mixed character, whereas the south side is almost entirely residential. We have all of the utilities, water, sanitary, sewer, electricity, and natural gas in place to serve redevelopment on this site. Beverly is a collector street and currently carries about 1,400 vehicles a day. It's a standard street with 60 feet of right-of-way and 33 feet of paving. The applicant's not proposing any changes in the access to the property. So, Dustin, do you have kind of that table that describes the overview of the Mr. Forshee's project? So, on the left-hand column is the standards for the C6 district, and the right-hand column is how Mr. Forshee's project lines up with that. The minimum lot size is 750 square feet. His lot is about 3 times that size and has more than the minimum frontage required on Beverly Drive. If he built Phase 1 only, it would cover 16% of the lot, and it would cover 30% of the lot if he built Phase 2, The maximum allowed in the C6 district is 50%. So even with Phase 2, he would be under that amount. He exceeds the minimum front yard setback, almost has double the setback that the minimum requirement would be. And we don't have information on parking layout, but we would want Mr. Forshee to clarify for us whether this would be non-climatized storage or whether he's proposing to have an office or any plumbing in the building. Because of the ample front yard, there's far more front yard landscape area than would be required by the ordinance. And he would be allowed to have signage on this property if it's rezoned for commercial use, but we don't know if Mr. Forshee has any plans for signage. So as we look at the building itself, we were provided a photograph that was a representation. I can't go so far as to call it an elevation drawing, but it's in your packets, and for the benefit of neighboring owners, this is a depiction of the type of building Mr. Forshee would like to build. And so as it relates to this photograph, he's planning to have overhead doors in the building that would face west. The side of the building would face towards Beverly Drive. The 45-foot frontage would face Beverly with the larger depth going north-south. There's a paved parking apron to the west and a 15-foot green space buffer along the east. And as we noted, the orientation of the building would be north-south. As we understand it, what is proposed is a basic metal storage building, no wainscoting, no other embellishments that we can determine. It's not clear whether the building would have windows or whether any windows are planned that would face Beverly Drive. But in terms of building design, your job is to look at the design and determine whether that would be compatible with surrounding development on Beverly Drive, and you could also look to the property to the north on the street directly north of this that has similar commercial buildings. We generally do not require off-street parking or handicapped accessible parking if a building is not going to be occupied and it would be considered non-climatized storage. So we need Mr. Forshee to clarify those aspects for us. We feel like this site needs to be designed to direct as much rough runoff and pavement runoff to Beverly Drive as possible. We have an existing rear yard drainage problem where water gets trapped between Armory Road and the back of these lots, and we need to make sure this doesn't aggravate that condition. Both as the landscape area and the number of plantings proposed conform with the city's landscape requirements. So in looking at this, we have two primary components for you to look at this afternoon. First, you need to establish whether the requested Plan C6 zoning is suitable for the site and compatible with the character of the neighborhood. And if you choose to recommend approval of the zoning change, you will then need to review the applicant's site development plan for the proposed commercial storage building and determine if the plan meets all required development criteria. So, as it relates to the rezoning request, you could recommend approval of the requested zoning change for this lot. You could recommend approval of the zoning with use of the property limited to a single use, which would be a building for storage of personal items and equipment. You could postpone consideration of the zoning question if you think you need additional information. You could recommend that the status quo be maintained and that this site retain its residential zoning. I think, Dustin, we had some potential supplemental possible findings that we could put up. So these were not included in your report. but these are, in reviewing the information and the surrounding neighborhood, these are some potential findings that might support approval of this request. We have a lot that meets all the minimum dimensional requirements to be zoned C6. It's not really suitable for residential redevelopment because of what surrounds it. The north side already has a mix of zoning and an existing C6 zoning with I-1 zoning directly to the north. If the use is limited to commercial building with personal storage only, that's not going to open this up for more impactful uses. The plan submitted meets all development standards, including side yard landscaping and screening. We have adequate utilities, and there's not going to be an impact on traffic if it's limited to the use that's being discussed. And then finally, this is in a transition zone from employment or industrial area to the north to suburban to the south. And so in the alternative on the zoning case, you could postpone consideration if you need additional information, or you could essentially deny the application for a zoning change and recommend that this retain its residential zoning. So before we go into any further details with the site plan, I would pause to see if there's any questions about the zoning question, the zoning application related to this property.
You mentioned that the building would only be used for storage. What's to say down the road that it turns into a repair shop?
The only thing between that and that occurring is the Planning Commission.
And what, if we approve it, what would guarantee that?
If you approve it and recommend that the uses be limited to a commercial building used for storage of personal items, and that was incorporated into the ordinance rezoning the property, then the only use of the property that could occur would be storage of personal items. And if there was a request for a future owner or this owner to change that, he would have to come back to the Planning Commission and get that use expanded. So if the Planning Commission feels that this is only supportable if the use is limited to that one proposed use, and you make that part of your recommendation, then that was option 2 that I laid out, was that you could recommend approval of this request with use of the property limited to a building for the storage of personal items and equipment. If that was your decision, then the only use of this property that could occur would be that use, and if there was any change, they would have to come back to the Planning Commission.
Any other questions for staff? Is the applicant here? Or a representative of the applicant? Please state your name and address, please.
Jeremy Forshee, 330 East Main Street, Assyria.
Thank you. Do you have any comments, or anybody here have questions?
Do you anticipate using the inside of this building for anything but storage? Do you anticipate future office space as either of the phases, or providing habitable space in either of these buildings?
We want habitation for living quarters?
No, habitation for like having an office where somebody might be present in this building working. That would involve putting in an office, having to install restrooms, providing parking. So when we use the term non-climatized commercial storage, that means essentially a building that's 4 walls and a slab where you store materials, but no one reports to work there, no one is making repairs or doing work or has an office or place of employment in the building. that is a different use than say a contractor's office where they're going to have office space, they're going to put restrooms and things like that in it. So part of, as we look to what uses that this property might be put to, if the Planning Commission said it was limited to non-climatized storage, and then you wanted to come back and put offices and workspace in the building, then you would have to come back to the Planning Commission to do that. If you indicate that that's what you're planning to do now, that's something that the Planning Commission can take into consideration at this point.
I believe in the future, yes, for future, we probably are going to want to have a restroom in there, probably more of a restroom than a office is at this point in time, but I think that kind of goes hand in hand.
And then, I don't know, Mr. Andrews, does that affect parking requirements?
It does. And so, and Mr. Hers has reviewed more of these than I have, but what we generally have is if someone declares, and we've had a number of projects where the original builder declares that it's non-climatized storage, then a tenant or somebody comes along and they want to add those things to it, we generally we have a condition that limits it to non-climatized storage, and then indicate that if there's any change in use that involves creating habitable space, that the property has to provide parking, including handicapped accessible parking and restrooms if there's any habitable space. So there's the potential to paint yourself into a corner if you build a building and don't provide any space for future parking or those types of things. We don't think that's an issue here. We didn't want to run into a situation where there wasn't a meeting of the minds of what the use of this building was going to be or ultimately be. So if we limited to non-climatized storage and said they could never put a restroom or offices in there, then Mr. Forshee would be stuck with that. But if you're comfortable with it being used for storage of personal items with or without restrooms and office space, then that could be included in your approval.
I believe that's what we're looking for.
You'd like
for
to have the
yeah.
option.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a building at first, but I think a restroom would be at some point in time needed in that facility.
How many overhead doors are you planning to put into the building?
2 on the first one if we do it to the west.
And the purpose for the overhead doors?
I currently own a 14-foot tall box truck, or 12-foot. I'll need a 14-foot door to get it in.
Okay.
And then we've got a enclosed trailer, and just so we can get mainly so we can get the box truck inside.
Okay. So, Mr. Andrews, if we do it as storage only, we have the overhead doors. If they start using it for repair of equipment, even their own equipment, that doesn't fall within that scope. Is that correct?
Right. If you're going to have people on the premises working, then you have to have plumbing, a bathroom, available parking for the people working there. And so we created this category for non-climatized storage because we do have people who build buildings around the community that aren't going to do anything but put pallets of goods or things in the building and not have anybody there. It might have a light switch and that's the only thing in the building. But we have experienced that some people say that they only want to use it for that purpose, and then comes along later that there's a tenant change or somebody who does want to do that. So we just want to be as transparent about that as we can to anticipate what the future uses are. But if this building is equipped with restrooms and has space for employees and provides parking, and their people are there working on equipment or things like that, that would be permissible as long as they have restrooms and parking provided.
So are you asking about how automotive repair is another use of C6?
Yeah, I guess my concern is again, with the overhead doors, you do it as a public, or you do it as a private storage, and then we start pulling vehicles into it, we're doing repairs. I guess my recourse is back to if there's the neighbors that are saying, hey, we don't want it in here because it's going to become commercial, and then it ends up being used for tractor repairs. You know, we're bringing in different equipment, trailers, whatever, and we're doing the repair. If they've got a restroom in it, now it becomes kind of a repair shop and not truly a storage area.
When did we hear this initially?
June the 18th this summer.
And Mr. Forshee, I thought that the assumption was that you were going to be using this basically as a storage place for your personal use of product or things you already own.
Correct.
That this was not going to be a business. We heard from the public. They stated that they had issues with that, and you stated that you
Well, I mean,
would
it's
basically be using this for storage.
correct. Yeah,
So
be storing my equipment.
has
and
that changed since the last time we heard it?
Nothing has changed on our end.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Andrews, on the C6 allowable uses, when it says automotive repair, does that mean commercially where you would receive money to do that, but if you had your own automobile stored in that storage shed, you could repair it? Or,
Well, we had a situation, it was on Grand Avenue, and it came before the Planning Commission for a number of things, but a gentleman purchased a property, platted it, and constructed a building because he owned, a fleet might be an exaggeration, but he owned a half dozen or more British sports cars, and he wanted a building where he could store those and tinker on them. And so he was permitted to do that the way the building was designed. But having personal sports cars that you own, that you tinker on yourself, is not the same as opening an auto repair business.
okay.
So if the whole purpose of doing, and it's not 100% foolproof, but the whole purpose of doing planned commercial and having that option available is it gives you the authority to limit the uses. And if auto repair or truck repair is not a permitted use, then if any auto repair or truck repair is occurring on the property, then it would be in violation. Whereas if you had a property that was zoned straight C6 and auto repair was an option, then yes, you could have a building that was used for somebody's personal hobbies, and then they could hang out their shingle and start repairing vehicles because C6 allows auto repair. But the purpose and advantage of planned C6 is that if you are concerned about that occurring, you can specify the uses that this property is limited to.
Thank you. There was a question about signage. Do you plan to put any signs out? Okay.
No.
And even if you did, I just know that there are limits to the size, but,
I
you know.
understand.
Would you like to change your request so that you can add restrooms and
Well, I guess I'd probably need staff's advisement on that. I'm not for sure what would be asking for.
Well,
I guess I just don't want to limit it out.
If what's approved, the whole genesis of this is Mr. Forshee owns a number of residential rental properties, has a number of pieces of equipment and trailers that he uses to maintain those properties, does not have a good centralized location for storing his maintenance equipment. If you simply use the term building used for storage of personal items and equipment, and that is the permitted use, that would still give Mr. Forshee the latitude to add restrooms and to have it as habitable space. We're only bringing that up because if we use the term that you're approving this for non-climatized storage, then you're not allowing for restrooms or any future occupancy. If you just use the term commercial storage and not the term non-climatized, then he's not going to be limited in that regard. We just wanted to make sure that the applicant and the commission understood the distinction. And for us, the primary distinction is we have had buildings built around town, and the building's put up and it's used for non-climatized storage, and people go by and observe that there is no off-street parking and there is no handicapped accessible parking, and that exception is only allowed if it's non-climatized storage. And we do have buildings built for storage that don't have access to any utilities except for water for fire protection. So there's storage buildings where there's no sewer, there's storage buildings where there's no gas service. And so this has the ability to be plumbed, to have restrooms, to have gas service, all those things. We just want everywhere to be the distinction between general commercial storage and non-climatized storage, so we didn't result in having this limited to non-climatized storage and Mr. Forshee coming in and saying, I want to add restrooms, and we say, you can't. And the other side of that is just so everyone is aware that if it's non-climatized storage, there's not a prescribed amount of parking, but if this becomes a place with habitable workspace, then a handicapped accessible parking space and probably another space would have to be provided on the site. There's plenty of room for that. It's just that we don't have that level of detail on the site plan.
So what I'm hearing is on page 12, number 2, if we word it like that, then that allows for habitable space.
Yes, if you word it like option 2 on page 12, it doesn't include the term non-climatized storage, so that would not limit Mr. Forshee.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Forshee?
What? I'm confused. We could allow restrooms in this place?
By number 2, the way it's written, don't say the word non-climatized in the motion. That's too limiting, more limiting, I mean.
Okay. So what I'm saying, you don't have to change the application to allow for
No.
No,
restrooms?
he does not.
Okay, all right.
No, what the vote will be on whether we want accept the PC6. That's what he's wanting, the zoning to PC6.
Absent using, if you just recommended option 1 and recommended this be zone plan C6, then that means it's subject to a site plan, but any use allowed in C6 would be allowed on this property. If you choose option 2, which limits it to that single use, then that's the only use that would be allowed on the property, but it does give him the flexibility to add restrooms and plumbing at a future date.
In option 1?
Under option 2.
In 2.
Option 2, okay.
Yeah.
Option 1 would allow for animal hospitals, auto repair, amusement parks.
You're
So-
saying, under option 1, you're saying any use in C6 is fine, subject to site plan approval. Under option 2, you're saying the only use that's permissible to us that's in C6 would be a building for personal storage of personal items and equipment.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Forshee?
We do want to see if there's any members of the public that want to speak to the uses involved on this property.
Yes.
And then we have another item we want to cover just related to the site plan. But this focus at this point is on whether the commission believes that that you wish to recommend approval of a zoning change to Plan C6.
Okay, thank you, Mr.
All right,
Forshee.
thank you.
Is there anyone from the public that would like to comment on this application? If not, we will go ahead and take a vote.
I'd move that we approve application Z19-7A, that the Planning Commission recommends approval of PC6 zoning with use of the property limited to a building for storage of personal items and equipment.
I would second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to go with option 2 on page 12. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Okay. Now we'll move on to talking about the site plan.
Dustin, if you want to put up your slide about possible conditions of approval. Once we have determined that you think that single use is appropriate and that the Plan C6 is appropriate to allow for that, your options on the site development plan are to approve it as submitted, approve it subject to specified revisions or conditions, or ask the applicant to revise and resubmit that plan. And here's where we already run into that potential conflict. So right off the bat, Dustin, I think we have to delete reference to that term in 1 that relates to the, so we're talking about commercial storage, not non-climatized storage. One thing we want to discuss with you, that you have the discretion to apply as a condition, is how you feel about the outdoor storage of building materials and equipment. You have the discretion to limit outdoor storage of building materials and equipment, or require that storage be confined to the building. The third potential condition deals with making sure we have a gutter and downspout system that effectively directs runoff to Beverly Drive. The fourth deals with site lighting and making sure that if there are lighting installed, that we're not having glare on adjoining properties. And then the other thing that is discretionary is whether you wish to approve seeing the plan for Phase 1 and Phase 2. You have the discretion to approve the plans for both of those at today's meeting, which means that if Mr. Forshee should decide to construct a Phase 2 addition to this building, he would not have to come back to the Planning Commission. So these are some possible conditions for you to consider incorporating into any action you take on the site plan. But your options, again, would be to approve the plan subject to whatever conditions you think are reasonable and appropriate. You could approve it subject to certain revisions being made to the plan. You could recommend denial of the plan as submitted, or you could postpone consideration if you think that additional information or revisions are needed for you to take this into account. And so our review of this plan is that it does conform with all C6 development standards, even with the proposed addition. The plan conforms with the city's landscaping regulations, and it does provide for a safe and efficient flow of traffic. And so with the use limited to personal storage, there's going to be very little activity or traffic generation on Beverly Drive. The only thing related to the building itself is we would like to confirm that it's metal building only with no embellishments. We would like to clarify whether there are any windows proposed on the building in addition to overhead doors. And there is no trash dumpster location shown on the applicant's plan, and we didn't know if there was any plans for having an exterior trash dumpster on the property. So with that, we'd be open to any questions you have about the plan, about possible conditions of approval, and we would like to get clarification from the applicant about confirming the exterior building materials, the presence or absence of windows, and any plans for trash disposal.
Thank you. Any questions for staff? If not, Mr. Forshee, would you come to the podium again? So I heard a question wanted to confirm it will be a metal building?
Yes.
No
and
embellishments?
Did Dustin, did you happen to get the plans I'd sent in that aren't that picture? Okay. The building will be similar to that. It is going to have wainscoting. I know you asked that earlier. Of course, the guttering systems that are standard on those buildings for the most part. Windows, I really don't think we're going to put any windows in that building. We don't have a plan for it right now.
And would that matter, Mr.
Unless
Andrews, if they put one in the future?
No, it's just a matter of whether, looking at the surrounding area and other buildings, whether from a design standpoint or compatibility standpoint, you find that windows are important. The one thing we'd note is that the building is over 50 feet back from Beverly, so it won't necessarily be noticeable or close to the street, but just to confirm that as a design aspect, most of these buildings don't have windows, but some of them, they're capable of having windows. We were just wanting to clarify that from a design and appearance standpoint.
And then, do you have plans for where the trash dumpster will be located?
I don't plan on heavy trucks I've tore out several driveways this year from a big dumpster truck, so we wouldn't have anything more than just your standard
Residential cart.
Yeah, we wouldn't bring in a big dumpster.
Okay.
And you're not planning on outdoor storage?
The only thing I would say outdoor storage is, I mean, we have like a couple trailers that we might put behind there. It'd be where the addition is, but they wouldn't be visible from the street for the
Not
most
building
part.
materials and assorted
No, that's the point
barrels.
of the building, is to get
Okay.
everything inside.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, the only thing that'd be sitting out over there would be some, we have a dump trailer and a couple enclosed trailers, and they might be sitting behind the building, but.
We don't consider the parking of vehicles or trailers to be outdoor storage.
Okay.
That's parking.
Any other questions for Mr. Forshee? Thank you. I'm assuming, or I guess I shouldn't assume, anybody from the public want to comment on the site plan? Okay. Are we ready for a vote?
So these there are 9 items on there, correct?
Yes, if you could,
Are not in our packet, right?
they're not
These
in your
would be to
packet.
attach to a motion for
That could be
recommendation.
attached. What we said in our staff report was subject to whatever conditions and limitations the commission deems appropriate, and after the packet went out, we said, well, we don't want to just assume that you can come up with those at the dais there, so we decided to take a stab at, these are things that the commission has used before in the case of planned commercial districts, and so we put these up there for your consideration.
So number 1 and 2 in the recommendations in the packet are part of that or in addition to that?
When you say number 1 and 2.
On page 3?
Page 3.
Or am I in the wrong?
Oh, page 13 is where what are you asking?
I don't have a clue. There's 3, there's 2 applications, right?
Right, but the
Well,
first one had two parts.
Two items to take action on. First item you've taken
Page
action on is the
13.
rezoning request. The second item is on the specific site development plan. And so the condition that you put on the rezoning request was that the use of the property is limited to building for storage of personal items and equipment. The conditions we're talking about here would be relating to the site development plan. And one option would be to approve the site development plan subject to whatever conditions that you believe are reasonable and appropriate. And what we determined after we sent the packet out is that we didn't provide you with any help or assistance of conditions that the commission had incorporated into some of your previous actions. So what you see on the screen there is an attempt to assist you if there are conditions that you think are reasonable and appropriate to attach to approval of the site plan.
So for instance, is trash up there at all? And, you know, if we want to say something about in the future, should he get a larger dumpster, then we could suggest where it's located?
Yes, and if he got a larger one, then he'd have to have a fenced-in enclosure for that dumpster. And so that's why we brought that item up. We didn't see any location proposed for an enclosure for a trash dumpster, so it just caused us to ask a question about whether one was being proposed. But
And he's not-
that could be a potential 10th condition, but if you want to scroll up, please, Dustin. So this is a fairly standard condition on all of these, but that the development of the building site be completed in accordance with the approved site development plan and landscape plan. So if he wanted to add a location for a future outdoor dumpster space, then I would not, as zoning administrator, consider that to be a major deviation from the plan, but I would have to work with Mr. Forshee to come up with a suitable location and a suitable enclosure plan for that dumpster. But since that is not shown on the plan before you this afternoon, then the assumption is that he's not going to have one.
Okay.
Dustin, if you can scroll up to number 2. Building materials and equipment, to me, that's a trailer equipment.
Okay.
Do you consider that?
We would consider equipment to be things like table saws, sawhorses, various types of barrels and buckets and things like that.
But not trailers.
We would not consider equipment to be trailers or vehicles. And that could be clarified by saying equipment other than vehicles and trailers, or how you would want to word that. But there's a expectation that with the paved apron that they have there on the west side, that there's going to be periods of time where there's vehicles or with or without trailers, or trailers with or without vehicles parked on that apron.
Any other conditions or limitations that you want to add? If not, we're probably ready for a motion.
I'll move. Application P19-3-3A.
Z19 still.
We're talking about the site plan associated with the application Z19-7A.
7.
Yeah, that's what,
Page
that was my confusion too.
Okay.
It's this previous number.
So we're in the section that's on page 13 of your report, and that identifies your options as it relates to the site development plan. And so if you wish to recommend approval of the site development plan subject to certain conditions, we've tried to assist you with that by putting those conditions up on the screen for your review.
Okay. So in regards to Z17-7A, move to approve the request with the addition of the Forshee storage building. And I think that, I'll do that. That's all. Was there another site for recommendations?
Well, as I try to determine as I understood the motion, on page 13, alternative 1 says recommend approval of the proposed site development plan subject to whatever conditions the Planning Commission believes are reasonable and appropriate. So under option 1, we determined that we hadn't provided you with any assistance as far as possible conditions or conditions that had been used by the Planning Commission before. So the items that are on the screen were intended to address that. And if the motion was to recommend option 1, which is approving the site plan with conditions, incorporating the conditions provided by staff, then we would incorporate everything that's on the screen into your action.
That's my intention.
So that's the motion.
The motion would be to recommend option 1 with the conditions provided and recommended by city staff.
I would second that motion.
Okay, there's been a motion and seconded to approve the proposed site development plan subject to the conditions on the screen. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say no. Okay, motion carried. All righty.
We do have a companion item to this, which is the plat.
So now we'll move on to item number P 19-3/3A, filed also by Mr. Forshee, requesting approval of a combined preliminary final plat of the Forshee Addition, a proposed one-lot plat of a 1/2 acre tract of land located on the north side of Beverly Drive, west of Broadway Boulevard. And this, too, is continued from the June 18 meeting to allow the plat to be considered concurrently with the rezoning request.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a one-lot plat. It's essentially a rectangular box. It's a single building lot. It's not complicated, but when we look at plats, we look at essentially 3 things. One is street frontage and lot design. This is a rectangular lot that will have frontage on, be accessed from Beverly Drive. All the utilities that one would expect to see for a building lot: public water, public sewer, electricity, natural gas, and storm drainage facilities. To the west on Beverly Drive, there's an 18-inch storm sewer with an inlet right in front of this property. Carries water to a large 72-inch box that drains north into the old Dry Creek cutoff channel. The other thing we look at is easements, and we are recommending that a utility easement be dedicated along the north 10 feet of the property. So this is really a cleanup plat of already developed property that was never platted. There's existing right-of-way for Beverly Drive, so the only thing we saw was a need for an east-west utility easement across the north 10 feet of the property. So we would recommend approval of this plat, subject to having a 10-foot easement across the north 10 feet of the property, and all cleanup corrections being made before the drawing is recorded.
Any questions for staff? Mr. Forshee, do you have any comments on this part of it?
I don't believe so, unless you have a question for me.
Anyone? If not, we're ready for a motion then.
Reapplication P 19-3/3A, recommend approval with the staff recommendations on page 3.
Is there a second?
I second it.
think Mr. Freiberger won. Motion has been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say no. Motion carried.
For the benefit of Mr. Forshee, these items are currently scheduled to go before the City Commission on November the 4th.
Okay, we'll move on to, well, it's a withdrawal of an application. Should I go ahead and read the?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead. It's a public hearing on this item that was continued, so.
Okay. Application number PDD-19-1 filed by Bill Sheppard on behalf of Grand Prairie Villas, LLC, requesting a change in zoning district classification from R1, single-family residential, to PDD-R1, Planned Development District, single-family residential, and approval of a preliminary development plan for the Grand Prairie Villas, PDD, to allow construction of patio homes on 50-foot wide lots. The subject property is located at the north end of Bent Grass Drive and is legally described as lots 18 through 36, Block 2 of the Grand Prairie Addition to the city of Salina, Saline County, Kansas. And
Thank you.
Mr. Staff.
This was a public hearing item on your September 3rd, 2019 agenda. And at the conclusion of that public hearing, you voted to continue the public hearing on this item to allow for some supplemental information to be provided by the applicant. And during that interim period, staff has met with the applicants and his legal counsel, and they have submitted a letter withdrawing the planned development district application that was scheduled for today's meeting. So because the hearing was continued to this date, we need to have it on the agenda, open the hearing, but the only action would be for the commission to acknowledge that there is, the application's been withdrawn and there's no need for any further action.
And no need for comments from anyone?
Not on an
Okay.
application that's been withdrawn.
Okay. Great. Any questions for staff?
It might just be helpful to have a motion to acknowledge receipt of the application, or the application withdrawal, and to recommend closing the public hearing due to that withdrawal.
I'll make a motion that we have acknowledged the receipt of the letter from Michael Montoya, attorney at law, to withdraw the application PDD 19-1, and that we move to close the public hearing on this item.
Thank you.
Second.
So you heard the motion, and it was seconded. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed say no. Motion carried. I see there's no legislative matter.
There are no text amendments for you tonight.
Yay. So we'll move on to administrative items. Application P08-2B, filed by Bill Sheppard on behalf of Grand Prairie Villas, LLC, requesting approval of a replat of lots 18 through 36, Block 2 of the Grand Prairie Addition, to the city of Salina to further subdivide these lots into 30 residential building lots. The replat area is located at the north end of Bent Grass Drive and contains 7.73 acres, and this is continued from the September 3rd meeting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We just wanted to clarify and remind the Planning Commission that how this is placed on your agenda and how plats, or particularly replats, are generally done. As the city attorney has described, that consideration of a plat, a final plat or replat, is generally considered to be a ministerial act, meaning it's not a public hearing item. There's no statutory requirement for a public hearing, as there is with a planned development district and a zoning matter. So all of the notice that has been provided in relation to this application and the initial public hearing on September 3rd was due to the Planned Development District application, which is a rezoning application. But that has been withdrawn, so now we are in receipt of the remaining application, which is a proposal to replat existing lots in the Grand Prairie Addition, and it has been modified since your original hearing on September the 3rd to reduce the number of lots from 36 to 30 and to increase all the lot widths to a minimum of 60 feet. And so, Dustin, I don't know if we have a slide in there that has the R1 development standards, but I thought I might start with that. So, just looking at this from the City of Salina's perspective and your responsibilities as a planning commission, the primary thing when we're looking at a replat or a final plat of a property is that the decisions relating to whether it's suitable for residential development, whether it is capable of being served by public utilities, whether it has a drainage plan and systems in place, are presumably already been made, and they have been made. So this property is part of an existing subdivision. It's already zoned R1. The minimum requirements in the R1 district are among the primary permitted uses are single-family detached dwellings. The minimum building setbacks are 25 feet, 7.5 feet, 25 feet on the rear. The minimum lot area that's required in R1 is 6,000 square feet. And the proposal we have here ranges from 7,320 to 8,100 square feet and above. The minimum lot width is 60 feet. All of the lots proposed in this plat are at least 60 feet in width, and the minimum lot depth is 100 feet, and our ranges are 122 to 150 feet plus in our lot depths in this area. The maximum height of a residential dwelling in R1 is 35 feet, and the most of a lot that can be covered by buildings and outstructures is 35%. We don't have minimum house sizes in the R1 zoning district or anywhere within our zoning code. We have lot size and setback requirements that do vary by residential zoning district, but we just wanted to start with a summary of what this property is already zoned for in terms of use. And then the primary responsibility of the Planning Commission is to look at whether the replat that's being proposed conforms with the zoning regulations and the subdivision regulations. So we have provided a whole lot of background into the original Grand Prairie Addition that was done in 2008 and 2009. And in order to have this occur, there were two major variations that were approved. One was the maximum length of a dead-end street, which is 2,650 feet if you look at bent grass in its entirety. And then the other thing is that there are some street curves that are tighter than what the subdivision regulations would normally allow for, but those variations were approved by the Planning Commission in 2008. And so the other thing that's notable about this subdivision is that the City Commission made a decision early on to be partners and joint applicants with Grand Prairie Addition to do this subdivision, because what ended up happening is that there were a number of property exchanges and swaps between the city of Salina and its municipal golf course and Grand Prairie Addition, where boundaries of the golf course were squared off and improved. The other thing is that there were a number of golf course trail corridor easements that were put through Grand Prairie Addition that allowed for personnel of the golf course to have access to get across the Grand Prairie subdivision to do maintenance on the golf course. The other thing of note is that the City Commission agreed to dedicate 7 public utility drainage and access easements across the municipal golf course property in support of this project. And so the final approval of Grand Prairie Addition and acceptance of all the dedications was done by the City Commission on May 4, 2009. November 9, 2009, the City Commission approved a resolution of advisability and authorization, and that created a benefit district for Phase 1 of Grand Prairie Addition. And there were 35 buildable lots in Phase 1 of Grand Prairie Addition. And each lot was assessed for its individual support services, streets, water, sewer, and every lot in Grand Prairie Addition was also assessed to share the cost of constructing Cedar Ridge Drive, which provides access to Grand Prairie Addition, and without the existence of Cedar Ridge Drive, there would be no Grand Prairie Addition. So in 2016, Phase 1 was approaching near build-out, and Cornerstone Development, which at the original Cornerstone Development consisted of 3 members, and now Mr. Sheppard is the sole member owner of Cornerstone Development, filed a petition requesting approval of a special assessment benefit district for Phase 2, and Phase 2 involved 17 lots. That was approved by the City Commission. Public improvements are now complete, and building activity is underway in Phase 2. So we had 70 platted lots in Grand Prairie Addition, all zoned R1 single family. The applicant, Mr. Bill Sheppard, would like to create a new housing product that's not currently available in the Salina housing market, villa-style homes. And he would like to construct those on lots that are 60 feet wide. So at the north end of Bentgrass Drive, it's currently platted into 18 lots. Those lots average 100 feet in width. Mr. Sheppard is now proposing to further subdivide these lots into 30 lots for the construction of villa-style homes on 60-foot wide lots. That's instead of the 50-foot lots originally proposed. While narrower than 100 feet, the proposed 60-foot wide lots conform with the existing R1 zoning, so there's no change in zoning needed or being requested for this area. So if this replat is approved, the total number of lots in the Grand Prairie Addition would increase from 70 to 82, which is a net increase of 12. We've summarized all of the historical information about the original subdivision design, the street access and design, and if this is approved, the replat area would contain 60-foot wide lots, which would mean the minimum lot requirement is being met. And so for that reason, the applicant has withdrawn the original application to rezone the replat area from R1 to PDD R1. So what we're saying there is if in the original plat, this area had been proposed for 60-foot lots, that would have conformed with the zoning being requested, and it would be consistent with R1 zoning and consistent with lots we have around the community that are zoned R1, some of which are 60, 62, 65 feet wide. There were questions about storm drainage. We have provided as much background as we can on that. We had 70 dwelling units originally proposed on 37 acres. That is a density of 1.9 units per acre. That is close to the lowest density of any residential subdivision that we have in Salina. Even some of the larger lot subdivisions like River Run and Highland Meadows Hamlet, 1.9 units per acre is a low density. So if this request were approved, the overall density would be 2.2 units per acre, which is still well below the typical single-family development. So we did not find a revised or supplementary drainage study to be warranted because of the very low densities involved and because of the elaborate studies that were done in 2008 and 9 to look at storm drainage. So that brings us to traffic. If you had full build out of a 70-lot subdivision and you use the ITE trip generation rates, you'd be looking at about 700 vehicle trips per day generated by this subdivision onto Cedar Ridge Drive. This replat has the potential to increase those vehicle trips to 820, but there's been a lot of research out there that housing that's targeted to seniors or 55-plus housing has trip generation rates closer to 6 to 8 trips per day, and so that would result in trip generation of anywhere from 770 to 800-plus vehicles a day. And so we just compared that to River Run, which is also a subdivision that has one way in and out with everything entering or leaving through one access point. And based on the number of lots in that subdivision, there would be over 1,000 trips per day entering and leaving on that one access point. So there's no changes to the right-of-way for Bentgrass Drive. The only change in the rear yard area, Westar had requested that the rear yard easements be widened to 20 feet, and the developer's proposing to eliminate the rear yard walk path easements that were in phases 1 and 2 as part of his phase 3. So if this were to go forward, it would require installation of about 880 feet of new asphalt or concrete paving. There would be 4-foot sidewalks constructed along both sides of Bentgrass unless an exemption would be requested and granted. There would be construction of street inlets, pipes, and flumes to carry runoff to the discharge points. There would be a need to construct internal public sewer lines and water main taps needed to serve individual building lots, as well as installation of fire hydrants. And so, just for the purposes of on the subject of covenants, there are existing recorded covenants in place for the Grand Prairie Addition. No modifications to or amendments of the existing covenants are being proposed, nor could they be proposed or ratified without the vote of 2/3 of the property owners in Grand Prairie. There is no plan or proposal to modify those existing covenants, and because the developer owns 100% of the property in the replat area, and it is within the applicant's discretion to add supplemental covenants addressing maintenance services and maintenance fees just within the replat area or the phase 3 area. So by our comprehensive plan, the definition of low density is anything 4.0 units per acre or below. The current density in this subdivision is 1.88 units per acre. The proposed density, if this replat is approved, would be 2.2 units per acre, and that is still 1.8 units per acre below what would be considered low density. And if you just looked at this area by itself, the proposed density is 3.88 units per acre, which is still below low density. So staff's primary concern is reviewing this is that we could not find any element of this proposed replat that did not conform with the city's subdivision regulations or zoning regulations. So we have made a recommendation to approve the replat subject to those conditions that you see outlined on page 11 and 12 of your report. We have, I think you were provided a map, maybe Dustin, that showed what the current ownership arrangement is in Grand Prairie Addition. So this map shows the property within Grand Prairie Addition that is currently owned by Cornerstone Development. And so you can see all of the property that's the subject of this replat is owned and controlled by Cornerstone Development. The areas that are shown in white there are lots that are owned by other parties or individuals other than Cornerstone. The ones in the southern portion that are shaded are lots that by our records are still owned by Cornerstone Development. So we provided some supplemental information about drainage and items that relate to the golf course, but there is a three-party agreement in place that involves the city golf course, the Mariposa Addition, and the Grand Prairie Addition that relates to drainage and relates to maintenance of the Mariposa Addition. And I don't know if you can go to one of the aerial photos, Dustin, but this pond right here, which is owned and maintained by the Mariposa Homeowners Association, is the recipient of the runoff that comes from this area. And a study was done and determined that almost 60% of the water entering that pond and being detained there was coming from the Salina Municipal Golf Course, and 20% was coming from the property that occupies Grand Prairie. And so formerly, the Mariposa Addition Homeowners Association was 100% responsible for maintaining that pond and the dam that is there. And now there's an agreement in place that makes the city responsible for about 60% of that cost and makes Cornerstone Development and the Mariposa Homeowners Association responsible for the other 40% of that cost. That dam that is right here has failed once and had to be rebuilt, but it was determined that the majority of the water that was coming into that detention area was coming from Salina Municipal Golf Course and not from development. So with that, I would be open to any questions about history, about drainage, about the subdivision regulations and their relationship to the zoning regulations. But the primary, and that may have been a bad idea on my part, but I had actually encouraged Mr. Sheppard to pursue the planned development district because it did allow for public hearing, public input, and input from the Planning Commission as far as what occurred there. But the plan now is to simply replat the area and to construct single-family homes that conform with R1 requirements. So there is no need to look at the type, style, materials, or anything of the homes being built there because it is a conventional R1 subdivision.
Now, for clarification, in the application, it states that the number of lots is increasing from 18 to 36.
That was the original application, was to go from 18 to 36. That has been revised between the September 3rd hearing and now, so that the application and the plat that you have before you this afternoon contains 30 lots, not
Okay.
36.
You mentioned the drainage, 80% from the golf course, 20% from
60% from the golf course.
60?
60% of the runoff that ends up in the Mariposa Pond comes from the Salina Municipal Golf Course.
Okay. Now, the 40% then, is that from the existing property? Or was that calculated with all the roofs and streets and driveways?
It was calculated from the areas, presuming that that development occurred
Okay.
with full build-out. And that includes the Mariposa Addition, which does send most of its runoff into that pond. There's also a piece of property that is east of this property that's owned by Mr. Bob Hayworth, and that property's not developed yet, but portions of that property also run into the Mariposa.
Okay, and then
And I
the,
provided a not very good map that's in your packets that shows the boundary of the drainage basin. And the drainage area is about 140 acres that ends up in that pond.
okay, and then it looks like, I would say there was a trade of properties, and Mr. Sheppard is acquiring 150% more property than the city is acquiring?
The city transferred 1.49 acres from the city to Cornerstone Development to square off some of the lots, and Cornerstone Development transferred .43 acres to the city of Salina.
So shouldn't that be a purchase rather than a transfer?
The city commission did not think so.
Okay.
There are benefits provided to the city of Salina by having golf cart easements that go across Grand Prairie that greatly facilitate maintenance of the golf course, and those were deemed to be benefits that were beneficial to the city.
Any other questions? And if I understand this right, since it's an administrative item, do we,
You are not obliged to conduct a public hearing, but you are certainly, it's a public meeting, so you are welcome to accept comments, but we would want to hear from the applicant first before we heard any other public comment, if you don't have any further questions of staff.
okay, I think we're ready to hear from the applicant. Please state your name and address.
Bill Sheppard, 430 Greystone Drive,
Do you have any comments or
unless you have any questions.
any questions? Well, Thank you. Sorry to make you come up. Well, I do appreciate this huge turnout. I wish all of our meetings had this kind of turnout. So I'm game to let anyone make a comment if they would like.
Afternoon. I'm Justin Hankey. I'm at 1322 Bentgrass Drive. I have a PowerPoint that needs to be pulled up.
Oh, thank you.
So before that's pulled up, I just wanted to ask Dean Andrews a couple questions. Last meeting, we discussed the emergency access road through the golf course, and you assured us the road was safe and able to serve as a separate access road for emergency vehicles. Is that correct?
There is a plan and there are easements in place for that emergency access road. There is not a piece connecting to Bentgrass Drive or down Bentgrass Drive at this time.
But the access road does exist within the golf course?
Yes.
Okay. Last time, Mr. Boff, I believe you asked about the ability to support an emergency vehicle, and you responded with, there are concrete pavers. Can you tell me where these concrete pavers are, what they look like, what they're made out of?
I can give you the design specifications for them that I have here in this item here. If you give me some time, I'll run upstairs and make some copies for you.
You have a rough idea?
I do not have a rough idea because I'm not the city's civil engineer, but I know they've been reviewed by the city engineering department.
Who has assured you that these are functional?
I don't have any assurances that they are functional from the engineering department at this time. I have the design plan for them. There's an easement in place and there was a pre-existing road there.
Okay. Can you go to the next slide? So this is from the City of Salina Muni Code, and it's the International Fire Code from 2012 that we adopted in 2016. There are no changes for these sections in the 2018 IFC guidelines. So developments of 1 or 2 family dwellings where there are a number of dwellings units exceed 30 shall be provided with 2 separate approved fire apparatus access roads. Is this what we're following along with the access road?
Yes.
Okay.
So if this is correct, none of the houses in Phase 2 should exist today. We should have blocked building permits, and those people that have houses in Phase 2 shouldn't have houses.
Exceptions to this are 30 dwellings if they were equipped with sprinkler systems, which none of ours are. The other exception is the number of dwelling units on a single fire apparatus access road shall not be increased unless fire apparatus access roads will connect with future development. You can go to the next one. So for this access road that you're talking about already exists. This is section 503.2, 1, 3, and 4 from the IFC guidelines. Dimensions of fire apparatus access road shall have an unobstructed width of not less than 20 feet and an unobstructed vertical clearance of not less than 13.5 feet. For surface, fire lanes shall be constructed of an all-weather surface, and I repeat, an all-weather surface capable of supporting and sufficiently conveying the imposed loads of a 75,000-pound fire apparatus. And then for turning radius, a fire apparatus access road shall have an inner turning radius of 35 feet and an exterior turning radius of not less than 55 feet. Do you feel the access road meets those requirements? Shall we wait?
Oh, yes, I don't know.
I think he went for more information, but as he said, he's not the civil engineer.
Okay.
And it does say, or shall
You
have,
probably need to direct questions to someone who actually has that information or authority to answer.
well, and the very last bullet at the end, or have a design approved by the fire code official, and I can't remember if I saw that they did look at it and approve it.
So all of these plans that have been constructed in the field as part of the Grand Prairie development were originally designed, reviewed, and approved in 2008. So all of these requirements as far as the secondary access, stormwater runoff, and easements that were put in place were reviewed and approved by this body and the governing body in 2008.
In 08, it was approved by the fire guidelines, which was Roger Williams. These guidelines were given to me by the fire marshal.
Okay. I was thinking that was kind of a standard procedure that they go through the fire department.
I would note that these are 2012 fire codes, and the codes that were used previously for the development were a different code.
I see.
So does that mean they're grandfathered?
Well, it means that the codes that the development was originally constructed under were conforming at the time, and if there are any nonconformities, they would be pre-existing nonconforming. I'm not prepared to say how this code is different than the one that was used, because I'm not that familiar with the fire code. But this is a 2012 fire code that we're seeing on the screen, and this subdivision was originally subdivided and developed prior to 2012.
I am correct in saying that this code was adopted in 2016 by the city commission, as stated on the Salina Muni Code.
Possibly.
And then But what I'm understanding him to say is that because the development was prior to that, it does not have to meet the latest codes.
Correct. So the subdivision as it was constructed was reviewed and approved at the time it was approved and constructed.
I'd love to see those guys. So we can't wait for Dean Andrew.
And it would be difficult when I think of homes that if we had to upgrade every code that exists every time they upgrade them, it would be difficult.
agree with
But
you.
I agree with you that safety is most
My
important.
neighborhood would improve.
I wouldn't have to use a 3-prong
Right.
converter.
I'd have wiring that, yeah, was grounded.
Okay, should we move on? Next slide. This is an overhead view of the access road from Markley in the top right corner here. Of course, it's down south, after turning off from Markley, down the south side of down south on the east side of hole 3, crossing across the fairway in front of the tee boxes, over the golf cart path, winding through these trees, down by tee box of hole 2 and hole 8, crossing across hole 8, and into where phase 3 down in the left corner. Is that as you know it, Mr. Andrews?
I'd have to get the easement that was dedicated by the city for the emergency access road.
Okay. Next slide. So here's the turnoff off of Markley. Okay. I don't know where the concrete pavers are. A fire truck is 35 feet long. It's 8.5 to 9 feet wide. And a fire truck could never make the turn off of Markley and stay on this path. And if you can tell me where the path is, let me know. Clearly, there's a lot of standing water. This day, it did not rain, but 2 hours, nowhere close to what we received in the spring and summer this year. There are also 2 small piles of randomly poured asphalt that are not level and retaining water. I guess that's what we're meaning by concrete pavers. Go ahead and do next slide. Coursing south, this is the path, the access road that is created by maintenance vehicles on the golf course that are the same width of a golf cart. And it's just standing water, mud, and grass. Next slide. Here we have a random strip of poured asphalt, not on any foundation, not level, would only support one wheel of a vehicle. It's about 2 feet wide, and on the other side of the path, just water and mud, sorry. Next slide. More standing water, some more randomly poured asphalt, not level, no foundation. Next slide. This will show you how uneven it actually is, making the turn across hole 3 in the fairway. Keep in mind the path's only about 4 feet wide. Next slide. We're going in front of the tee boxes on hole 3. Just more path, nothing really poured or created. Go ahead, do next slide. The slide on the left was taken about a week before the slide on the right. There's been a lot of irrigation on the golf course recently. They actually put a sprinkler directly in where the path is. You can see the soil filled in here. They were able to dig through this with a shovel and a foot. So I don't know if there was a concrete paver there that would support a vehicle. Go ahead and go next slide. So going across the golf cart path made for golf carts, not a 75,000-pound fire apparatus. Crossing over into the area in between hole 3 and hole 2. There's another small area of randomly poured asphalt that's not level and retaining water. Next slide. This is just the start of a mud path with mulch on it. I don't know if mulch and concrete pavers are interchangeable terms, but I don't think this is adequate. Next slide. Just continued mulch and mud path. Also, a fire truck could not make this turn with the radius. Next slide. When I was approaching this in the golf cart I was in, I actually got stuck here. A golf cart weighs 900 to 1,000 pounds. I weigh 175 pounds soaking wet. That's well under the 75,000-pound requirement, and it could not support me. Next slide. These tree branches are lower than 10 feet, continued mud path, nothing that can support a fire apparatus. Next slide. Continued mud path, nothing special. Next slide. More path, also this is too narrow for a fire truck to get through. Another slide. Same thing, randomly poured gravel. This tree hangs down about 9 feet. And the turning radius is too sharp for a fire truck. Next slide. We are approaching the area north of the 8th tee box. Once again, this is only 4 feet wide. It's for a golf cart path, essentially. Next slide. We're right north of the 8th tee box here. You can't even differentiate a path because it's just grass. Here is in front of the 8th tee box. It's gravel asphalt poured with standing water around it, only about 4 feet wide. Next slide. The left shows the asphalt path in front of 8th tee box, standing water around it, 4 feet wide. This is the golf cart path on hole 8, and this is the path leading into where phase 3 will be. Next slide. So, do we feel this access road is safe and up to code? We can't make the turn off of Markley Road. Multiple turns on the path don't have the required turning radius. Multiple points on the path are under the vertical clearance required. No point on the path has concrete pavers. No point on the path can support a 75,000-pound fire apparatus. No point on the path is wide enough. No point on the path has an all-weather surface. When I had the fire department come out and evaluate this, they obviously said we would never use this in any scenario whatsoever. We wouldn't even attempt to. I was also told Mr. Andrews frequently approves things without clearing it through them, and this would be one of them. When asked about the 10-foot setbacks on the previously proposed PDD, they said they'd never known about that and they would never have approved it. They did not feel that would be safe. However, that has been withdrawn. Next slide. So back to this, section D107.1 for the 30 dwellings and needing 2 separate fire apparatus access roads that are functional. 27 homes are currently built or being built in Grand Prairie. Without an acceptable access road, only 3 more can be built without violating the fire code. Building a winding, acceptable fire apparatus access road through the golf course would be a costly project of taxpayer money, which recently has not included our applicant. It would shut down the front 9 of the municipal golf course for an extended period of time, and it would ruin the appearance of the front 9. Next slide. So, are we willing to put human life at risk and any lawsuits that would come against the city if there was an emergency? The thing to keep in mind is this isn't just fires and tornadoes and natural disasters related to weather. If there's any medical emergency that a vehicle needs to get back to get somebody that requires time-sensitive treatment, heart attacks, strokes, any form of shock, the city's going to be to blame for the bad outcome. If you feel this application should still be approved, there are other people that want to speak. However, I don't think we should spend more time on this issue since we absolutely know it's not safe. Mrs. Good, last time you asked us, are we willing to compromise on the number of homes that would be in phase 3? Mm-hmm. We're asking you this time, are you willing to compromise with safety of human life?
And I appreciate you bringing this to our attention. What we vote on today would not, well, it has to do with whether the application meets the zoning requirements. And so this is a separate issue.
I believe he had stated that this needed to meet all regulatory requirements, and that would be the fire code.
Seeing what,
This clearly isn't safe. You're knowingly going to vote to potentially hurt people.
okay, so that is one of the requirements in the, to meet the
It was not a
application.
requirement in 2009. It is a
There is no way those
requirement now.
guidelines in 2009 would have allowed that path to support a 75,000-pound vehicle. No way.
Mr. Sheppard.
Yeah, I'll wait. I really do appreciate you bringing this to our attention, and we'll go ahead and let Mr. Sheppard respond to your,
2 wrongs don't make a right.
The path that he's referring to is not constructed yet, and if you go back and look at phase 2, when we put phase 2, it was talked about at that point, it wouldn't go in until phase 3 when the roads are to it. There's no roads to this path. The only path that's there is one that's been there for years that the golf course has used, but there is an engineered design, Dean Andrew has it, but it is not constructed yet, so.
is that your understanding, Mr. Andrews, that it's? Let's see.
It doesn't matter because we don't have the same fire marshal in place now as we did in 2009, so.
The current fire marshal is expecting a request for a formal assessment, and he did state that the previous fire marshal a lot of times would approve things that should not have been approved.
I'm hearing a lot of stuff. A lot of hearsay, a lot of things, a lot of suggestions, a lot of theories. I'm not sure if we're talking about density or we're talking about safety here. But what is the process now?
If that is, if everything there is a matter of public safety concern, then the action that should be taken is to not act on this replat and to put a moratorium on all building permits in Grand Prairie, no new houses, until a fire apparatus road connecting to Markley Road meets all the requirements of the current fire marshal and fire chief. That is not what was set out originally. The city commission would not have granted an emergency access road easement across the golf course in 2009 if there wasn't an intention to build that. But if the concern is that emergency access is inadequate at this point, then you should not act on this replat. But this replat is irrelevant when it comes to public safety. It means the entire Grand Prairie Addition is unsafe, and nobody should have built there in the first place.
And who would place this moratorium on it?
You would make that recommendation, and then the city commission would act on that recommendation.
And would it not be correct to say that we have approved many plats of many developments that are in this stage at this process, and those things evolve in the process?
Most of our subdivisions, Salina, are developed in phases, and the streets and the infrastructure and those things go in phases, and what we try to do is plan for that in the initial stages. But if you have reviewed all the information, if you think that fire apparatus road needs to be built 100% and connect down to where Phase 2 of Bentgrass Road ends today, and that needs to happen before anything else in Grand Prairie happens, then no, you should not act on this proposed replat. But that means that even if you denied the replat, there would still be lots there that should not be built upon because they're not safe. And it also means that the city commission should never have approved Phase 2 and should never have allowed any homes to be built in Phase 2 because supposedly we violated our fire code.
Sure. Please state your name and address.
My name is Don Wendt, and I live at 1401 Bentgrass Drive. I think what happens sometimes when, Mr. Andrew, you say that this should have never happened, I think this replat would have been approved this evening if we would not have brought this issue up. So I think it's more of this issue was not brought up at the time, nor was it looked upon as what it should have been. So we shouldn't make a decision on that based on what someone else at that time made a decision on and probably did not have that information in front of them. And you know, the other thing that we talk about is the covenants. Mr. Andrews had stated that there's covenants in place and that Mr. Sheppard plans on this targeted development of this area, which is the reason for the replat. And I think we have copies of the covenants that we'd love for you to look at because these covenants are in place. And one of the items in the covenant is that there shall not be any division of lots. And this is dividing of lots. Now, there is part of that, it says, can I pass, did you have those? Yep.
You understand that we are not responsible for enforcement of covenants.
Yes, I completely understand that. I'm just saying that this goes to the replat, which should, if we're saying that covenants are and should be enforced, I understand the city does not, but the covenants are the reason that we bought these lots in this area. And this is going against the covenants, and this is going against what we were originally told and, if you will, sold. And I understand that that there's different areas in town with this density and all that, but this does not fit this area. Yes, there is a need for, higher density homes. There is a need for, maybe some 55 and older, but going back to the covenants, if you first would turn to page 11, in the introduction, it says, Grand Prairie is a unique residential community. These guidelines serve to create a cohesive neighborhood with quality construction throughout. Generally, the vision of an efficient, high-quality home set within the surroundings of the golf course, keeping a feeling of openness and park-like atmosphere. These guidelines are designed to promote environs yielding a pleasant and rewarding lifestyle while enhancing and protecting the long-term property values of Grand Prairie. And I say this replat goes against that statement. But if you would also turn then to page 13, and under item number 4, lot integrity, no lot shall be split or divided into a parcel with lesser dimensions than that of the recorded plat. And then it goes on to talk about some other things. But I think that statement right there is one that says that you should not allow a replat of these lots, because it goes against the original intent of this subdivision and what we all were told and what we all understood of this subdivision. But there's also another one, if you'd go to page 19, and if you would look under the introduction, and this is on the design and use guides. And it states, Grand Prairie is nestled within the surrounding golf course. And that's stated in here several times. Landscape designs are encouraged to reflect the goal to preserve within Grand Prairie the open and unobstructed park-like feeling of the adjacent terrain. Again, it goes back to the openness, the park-like, even the name of the development is Grand Prairie. So I understand that what's before you is only should you a replat or not, but I say that you can't knowingly approve this replat with the safety issue in mind and with this going against the original intent of this development and the in-place covenants that are in place today. Just envision that if there's a fire at the entrance of Grand Prairie, they're going to block off that the only entrance and exit there, and then someone at the end in phase 2 or phase 3 hypothetically has a medical condition. That person is not going to get the medical care that they need and attention they need as it exists today. There would be no possible way that a fire truck and emergency can get into that person that is further down in the development. Now, that's all hypothetical. Will that ever happen? May not. But I don't want that on my conscience, and I think all of us in the neighborhoods are united in saying this is not what this original development was proposed to the city, approved in 2008, 2009, and does not conform with its original intent if you approve the replat. So again, I implore you not to approve this replat, and you have to consider the safety of us as neighbors and citizens of Salina. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
You have a question?
Well, I guess, does anyone have a question?
Yes.
Oh, sir, sorry.
Yeah. You understand, though, that we're here just to approve the plat and with safety considerations in mind. If it's within the
Ordinances or
the Planning
regulations.
Commission's purview to approve a plat that is already within the regulations of the city, I don't know that we have that much reason to say no. Certainly not, covenants is not a reason for us.
So then what you're, let me make sure I understand, then what you're saying is regardless of how it affects citizens and the surrounding community, people, the golf course or anything, that should be of no concern of the Planning Commission, that your only duty is to approve it if it falls within the restrictions of an R1 and nothing else is to be considered?
Well, definitely safety.
outside of safety? If it doesn't fit the area, why would we replat this? I guess that's a question, is, I understand what you're saying is that you feel that, and has been presented to you, that you only have to decide, does it fit within an R1 zoning or not, but I say that shouldn't be the only reason to approve a plat, because it definitely needs to fit within the community, it needs to fit within the area, it needs to fit, and this just doesn't fit. And I don't understand why it has to be only black and white if it fits an R1 zoning or if it doesn't, and that's the only thing you have to decide. And I don't think that should be the only reason for you to make a decision on whether to approve this replat. Again, it's how does it affect the surrounding people and area, and is it a fit? And it's not a fit for, this is a unique area. And that's what we've talked about through all of these meetings, and Mr. Andrew has provided several documents about how the city and at the time had to work together to swap land and to make this a unique area. So why would we change that? Why would we go through this and change it just because it's put before you only a replat? We wouldn't have, at that time, have approved it, maybe, if those lots would have been within the 60-foot range, because again, that at that time, when all of the work was done, it was that original plat. So why should we undo that?
I would like that, Mr. Andrews, to answer that question.
Well, as to the question of the lot split and lot splitting, I did work with the original developers on getting the language for that finalized, and that is a covenant that's in some other of the subdivisions in Salina, but we have provisions in our subdivision regulations for lot splits, and we have a provision in our regulations for replatting. And the interpretation of the city attorney is that what Mr. Sheppard is proposing here today is not a lot split, it's a replat. And if the plat gets approved and recorded, then all the lots would be consistent with the dimensions on a recorded plat. So that would be consistent with the covenants. A lot split would be if you approved a plat with 60-foot wide lots, and then Mr. Sheppard went in and split off 10 feet from a 60-foot lot and made it a 50-foot building lot, that would be a lot split. Or if somebody goes into Grand Prairie and they buy a lot from Mr. Sheppard, and the lot is 105 feet wide, and they buy it and they put a house on one half and another house on the other half, that would be a lot split, because that would be a property division without a replat. So the appropriate venue to determine whether this is an illegal lot split or a lot split that violates the covenants would be upstairs in Saline County District Court, at least according to our city attorney.
Okay.
As to the other aspects of that, those are somewhat subjective, and admittedly the Planning Commission's hands are tied in the platting realm to being somewhat objective.
I want to, if you go back to the covenants on page 13, number 4, it addresses plat. It says that with 2 lots may be combined into 1 or 3 into 2, but no further assembly or plat modification shall occur. It addresses plat modifications in this covenant. And again, that's the original intent of this property. Why would you want to go against what the original intent of this is? The original intent of this is to keep it the way it is, and these covenants support that. It says cannot split lots, and I think that's a workaround to a split lot. I think as a typical layperson that I am, when I think a split lot, it doesn't mean to take a 10-foot section. It means to take a lot that is this wide and make it into 2 or 1.3 lots. That's a split to me.
And I understand what you're saying. In that same paragraph, if you read on, it does say such plat modifications are subject to any and all existing easements, City of Salina Planning Department approval. So it looks like they gave a way out for modifications.
But it does say no further plat, so. Anyway, again,
May I ask, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
If, so am I hearing that if the original plat is approved, and was it 1 per 100-foot wide lot?
It is platted now, as you see it, well, not that one, but it's platted now already. So this would be a replat or a change of the plat.
And I didn't know if we were replatting the PDD proposal? You know,
We are taking an existing platted area that consists of 18 lots that are roughly 100 feet wide each,
Okay. And with that.
and taking that same area and re-subdividing that 7.73 acres into lots that are on
60
average
feet.
60 feet wide, with the exceptions up in the corners where the dimensions are roughly the same as they are today.
So what I'm hearing is that you are okay with the original, every lot is on 100 feet width. Are you okay with that being done without improvements to the fire entrance?
My answer would be no, because this safety concern is now brought to our attention, and I think we can't ignore that. I would like to say yes, but I think with that, I mean, I'm talking about my family's safety here, and I cannot knowingly say I'm okay with that, because I do not believe, and I think we've shown, that there is not adequate access to this property as it was originally intended as an emergency access to it. So I would say no. I'm not comfortable with that until we address the emergency access, until that emergency access road is up to code, current code.
So what I am hearing is a moratorium request.
I think that is, it's a two-sided coin. One deals with this the issues that relate to fire safety that are being stated apply to this north piece, whether it's 100-foot wide lots or 60-foot wide
Right.
lots. And so that trumps anything that deals with the covenants or anything else, because that's a public safety issue. If you agree that that's a matter of concern, then first of all, Phase 2 never should have happened. And second of all, everything in Grand Prairie should be stopped in its tracks, and that even in Phase 2, nothing further should occur until a fire apparatus road connecting Markley Road to the north edge of Grand Prairie that meets the requirements of the current fire code is in place. And that would be my recommendation.
Maybe we should hear from more public.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
I'm going to go back to this. Chris Carlson, 1217 Bent Grass. As you all know, I told you last time, we just built our house, and as stopping everything, that we had a bathroom almost done, tub in, everything. Somewhere within that 24 hours, the city changed the rules, where you had to have another piece of, and our fireplace, I believe, was the same, where you had to have a second set of drywall. It was stopped, it was ripped out, and it was redone. So, in my opinion, until this access road is done and taken care of, you look at Phase 3, it hasn't been started, doesn't have any streets or anything, it shouldn't go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Or, Mr. Sheppard, do you want to say anything?
I just want to reiterate that the emergency road is part of Phase 3. It's not there, and it does no good to put it in unless Phase 3 is completed. Because you can't get to that access road without having Phase 3 completed. Does that make sense?
Phase 2 and 1's at the other now.
Well, there's still that was approved by the Salina City Commission.
But it's not,
Huh?
it's not the code now.
Well, I'm not an expert on fire code. Obviously, you guys are.
No idea that road would go like 20 feet wide.
Look at the design. I'm sure you know more about it than the design is here.
Sir, would you like to make a comment? And your name and
I have
address.
copies of a legal document that I'd like you to have.
Okay.
Sir.
And I'll get one more here.
We can share.
That's okay, we can share.
I've already made the copies.
Right.
And please state your name and address.
Good afternoon, or evening, I guess now. My name is Mark Bolin. My wife and I are building our forever home at 1338 Bentgrass Drive in the Grand Prairie Addition. First of all, thank you for taking the time to listen to public comment with concerning zone planning in the city of Salina. I know on September 13th, some planning commissioners were concerned with environmental issues. I believe my point of concern is an environmental issue. It is the additional runoff floodwater created by building on land. In other words, when you have X amount of space, then you build on that space, there's less land for rainwater to naturally be absorbed. In this situation, the original platting for Phase 3 is to build 18 homes on this piece of ground. Now, the plan before you is to increase that number to 30 homes, adding a larger footprint on the ground, so less area for the rain to naturally be absorbed. There will be 12 more homes, 12 more driveways, 12 more patios, 12 more sidewalks. So with this proposed replatting of Phase 3, the runoff floodwater is going to increase another 66%. That brought up another concern, which I believe Dean Anders brought up. Where does that runoff water go to? It goes to that retention pond, which is at the north end of Mariposa Housing Addition, about 1/4 of a mile west of Grand Prairie. My next point is the legal document that you have before you. It's a public record with the Saline County Register of Deeds. I'm referring specifically to Book 1193, pages 95 through 108. The document title is Agreement for Grant of a Public Sanitary Sewer Easement and Drainage Facility Maintenance Covenants. That drainage facility refers that retention pond at the north end of Mariposa. This agreement is between the City of Salina, Mariposa Homeowners Association, and Cornerstone Development Group, LLC, which is the developer of Grand Prairie. In reading through this document, it puts much responsibility on the Mariposa lot owners along with Mariposa Homeowners Association in regards to repair and replacement of the drainage facility. In the agreement, on page 4, item 4, refers to repair or replacement of drainage facility, the retention pond that we're talking about. Bullet point A, the proportionate share of post-development runoff. Mr. Anders, and sorry if I mispronounced your last name, but he stated that the city at large was at about 60%. It's actually 53%. Cornerstone and Mariposa has about 47%, much different than 40%. The percentage for Cornerstone was based on 18 lots in Phase 3, not the proposed 30 lots. Those percentages for all three entities, the City of Salina, Cornerstone LLC, Mariposa Homeowners Association, are going to change if this replatting is approved, with a higher percentage of post-development runoff coming from 30 lots in Phase 3 instead of 18 lots. The proportionate share for Cornerstone would be larger. Yes, Cornerstone compensated Mariposa Homeowners Association back in 2008-2009 with monies in the amount of $20,000, thereby washing their hands clean of any future repairs or replacement of the drainage facility, the retention pond, based again on 18 lots in Phase 3. I have been in contact with the current officers of the Mariposa Homeowners Association, and all three are opposed to this replatting. 2 of the 3 officers, and if you'd please stand, are present today. The third one was not able to be here for prior obligations. Thank you. This is not what the prior Mariposa HOA agreed to in 2009, nor do the current officers of the HOA agree with. Two more thoughts to ponder. What is another 66% of potential floodwaters going into the pond? It has an earthen dam, it will hold. Go back in time to 1986, January 1986. At Kennedy Space Center, NASA went below the parameters that were used for a shuttle launch by just a few degrees. We all know what happened then. Or let's go to present day, the introduction of Boeing 737 MAX. Let's figure it out as we go. We all know how that ended. I'm not an attorney, but I believe you now have before you another point of concern and a legality issue. I believe you cannot allow this replatting of Phase 3 in Grand Prairie to go forward, not without legal recourse. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do you all have any questions for this
Mr.
gentleman?
Boland. Mr. Boland.
Mr. Boland, thank you. Any questions, comments, stormwater? Thank you. I assume city engineer did calculations on,
The calculations were based on area and based on projections, but it is, everything that Mr. Boland said is factual. The only counter to that is the fact that the densities in Grand Prairie Addition are so unusually low in terms of the ratio of green space to building that the increase from Mr. Sheppard's proposal only increases it from 1.88 to 2.2 units per acre, which is far below the assumptions that are used for that, but all of that is a fair statement. The city attorney was involved in the preparation of that document. It was recognized at the time of the platting of Grand Prairie Addition that the majority of the runoff from Grand Prairie ended up in the Mariposa Pond. The things that need to be clarified is there are a number of things being alleged as if the city commission at the time had no knowledge or involvement. But the city commission was the body that granted easements across the golf course property to allow runoff to occur, allowed a sewage connection to be constructed underneath the golf course that allowed for a dedication of an emergency access road easement across the portion of the golf course identified. So the city commission was informed and knowledgeable of all these things that were occurring. What occurred with the Mariposa Pond was that the dam that was there failed, and the Mariposa Homeowners Association lacked the resources financially to repair it, and also made the case that it was unfair for them to bear the sole cost of replacing it because so much of the runoff that entered that pond originated on property not in the Mariposa Addition. So this agreement that Mr. Boland has provided with you that was approved by the City Commission in 2009 was an attempt to address that imbalance and to provide compensation to Mariposa for repairs already incurred and future repairs. So one of the options that we presented to the commission, which is something that's in the report and you can act on, is if the city commission believes that these proposed changes, I point out on page 8 of your report that the planning commission has the authority to require a supplemental drainage study to be prepared and submitted by the applicant if it finds that it's needed to address any drainage concerns resulted from the proposed increase in dwelling units from 18 to 30. So that would be another reason to postpone taking any action on this if you agree that a supplemental drainage study is needed to evaluate the differential impact between the 18 units currently accounted for and the 30 units being proposed. But from staff's perspective, drainage covenants, all those things are important, but public safety is the number one item of concern, and if that item is concerned, then you certainly should postpone consideration of any of this action, and also recommend that there be no new building permits issued in Grand Prairie until the fire apparatus road is in place. And if that means constructing a temporary gravel road down Bentgrass Drive to where the road ends in Phase 2, then that needs to be stated. I agree with Mr. Sheppard that it was anticipated that the full connection and everything would be made when Phase 3 was done, because there was nothing for the fire apparatus road to connect to until Bentgrass Road was completed. But if Bentgrass Road is not going to be completed, and this is the end of Grand Prairie, then that temporary connection from Markley Road to where Bentgrass Drive ends needs to be done.
But Mr. Sheppard is paying a penalty that the prior developer put him into.
No, Mr. Sheppard is the prior developer.
Oh, okay. Different name.
Yes. Mr. Sheppard was a part of Cornerstone Development Group. He had two other partners. Those partners are no longer involved in Cornerstone, so he is the sole member of Cornerstone. But Mr. Sheppard was involved in all the original planning and everything that went into, and it is a fair statement that and I cut out about 1/3 to 1/2 of the volume of your staff report just because this subdivision has more legal documents associated with it than any other subdivision in Salina, and that's because of all the crisscrossing of the golf course and the cooperative arrangements between the city and Grand Prairie and the arrangements with the Mariposa Addition to get sewer access and to address drainage. And so without the ability to cross Mariposa property, this subdivision would not have sewer service. So there had to be a lot of cooperative agreements that were reached in 2009 for this to happen. And apparently there are still more cooperative agreements that need to be reached. And that applies whether Phase 3 has 100-foot lots, or 70-foot lots, or 60-foot lots, or 50-foot lots. All those things apply.
Any more public? More public?
Yeah, good. Does anyone else have any comments? Would like to make some comments?
You asked about a penalty for Mr. Sheppard. What's the penalty of somebody getting hurt and losing their life? This is common sense.
Would that be a public street, that access?
No.
No, it would not. There, as I mentioned, I have the copies here. The emergency access road has been designed. The emergency access road design was reviewed by the fire department and the city's engineering department. The plans have been approved. Even if there's individual golf course personnel that don't know about it, the city commission approved it. So it's not something that golf course personnel can claim ignorance of, because you have a letter in there from the Parks and Recreation Director approving it, and the City Commission granting an emergency access easement across the municipal golf course from Markley Road to the north end of Bentgrass Drive to allow for the construction of an emergency access road. And Mr. Sheppard is correct that there was nothing to connect it to until that North Peninsula was developed, and so the City of Salina staff is going to have to regroup and see what happens with Grand Prairie, if any other development or building permits can be issued, or whether there needs to be a moratorium based on, but again, all things being as they were, the homes that are built in Phase 2 should not have been built, because this, if what is being said about Phase 3 is correct, then the houses in Phase 2 shouldn't have been built either.
With all of that said, wouldn't it be prudent then that we reassess this, that we get with the fire department and we reassess and relook at this? Because as you said, it was approved in 2008, 2009, City Commission knew about it and so on. But again, this is a concern, and wouldn't we and shouldn't we then relook at this and then have, again, the city engineer, the fire department, to then reassess this and study this and come back with what their recommendation would be? Thank you.
That is exactly what should happen.
Yeah, I said that a while ago. Before all of that, I'm not here to decide things based on subjective opinions and interpret things like covenants. So I would say that we need to place suggest that a moratorium is placed on any more building there, and postpone this until further discussion or more evidence is obtained.
My motion would be postpone consideration of a replat for Phase 3 and recommend a moratorium be placed on any new building permits in Grand Prairie until a fire apparatus road connecting to Markley Road to the north end of Grand Prairie, meeting the requirements of the current fire code, is in place.
That is my motion.
Seconded.
Okay, there's been a motion and seconded, and I hope everyone caught that. Does anybody need it repeated? Okay, good. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed, say no. Okay, so
So there will be no future meeting dates on this. No, the application is in suspense until the status of that emergency access road is resolved to the satisfaction of the current Salina Fire Department. I'm not going to speak to prior fire marshals or fire chiefs, but if that's the position of the current. But one thing I guess I would request from Mr. Hankey is who he spoke with at the Salina Fire Department, because I had a meeting with Troy Long, the fire marshal, to review these plans before this item came to the Planning Commission. I understand that, but...
I didn't give names, so I told him I would not.
Okay,
But Troy is well aware of the condition of this.
okay.
So will we be notified once this is complete? Will the citizens and the neighbors rather in the area receive notification of the findings?
We can do that. That would be highly unusual, but we can do that. This application is closed out, and this application is irrelevant because nothing, basically what we're hearing today is that no houses should be built at all in Phase 3, and whether they're 100-foot lots or we turn it into a park or whatever that case would be, no one wants any houses built in Phase 3.
But
I'm saying that we talk.
before you get there, Dean, you said Phase 3, but it also includes Phase 2.
Well, Phase 2 is an item of concern, is if Phase 1 is not safe, and then Phase 2 is not safe, and, yes.
Well, I think we're trying to determine what that, and
Phase 1 has 34 building lots, so it is not safe.
I guess my.
There are 34 building lots that could potentially have houses on them.
yeah, these sorts of decisions affect everyone in many layers and many ways. I have been a developer all of my life. I've developed many neighborhoods. What I've been trying to say from the very beginning is, interpretations and subjective opinions about what you're doing affects everyone. So if your house is now unsafe, it's part of the process.
Back to my original question, though, will we receive notification? If not, how do we receive notification after this, the next step, which is to have this, the access road and have the fire marshal and everyone reassess this? How do we receive notification on those findings and that process?
Well, the first way you'd receive notification is if it reaches a point where the city commission puts a moratorium on new building permits in Grand Prairie. That would be an item of notification. But it's going to be an internal process to iron out the timing and the status of the emergency access road. And I don't know how, if you want to be informed if the final answer and solution is reached, do you want to be informed when it's built? What do you want to be informed of?
After the assessment, what that result is from the fire marshal and the city engineer?
The assessment in 2008 was that this subdivision could not be developed and built without an emergency access road coming over from Markley Road. The only question that was in doubt at that time was what the timing of the completion of that would be. If the timing is that it needs to be built right now, then that will have to have a meeting of the minds of the engineering, fire department, and determine how that gets built. The easement's there, the road's all designed, it's a matter of building it.
Correct. So how do we get notification of that?
What do you want to be notified of?
As just I said, once that decision is made, what the next step is. After the assessment from the fire marshal and the city engineers, what I understand the process is, how do we get notification from those findings of what the next step is? Whether the road has to be built and what that'll be.
If there's a decision made that the road has to be built right now, then we will inform you of that.
And then
If the decision is that the construction can be deferred, then we will inform you of that.
So will this go before the city commission now, at this point?
This item is not going to go to the city commission because the planning commission is the body that approves or disapproves plats.
So then if this is brought up again, we'll receive notification if the plat's brought up again?
You will receive notification. I've tried to explain at the start of the meeting that a plat is an administrative item and there's no requirement for public hearing. And so all the notice that we're providing to the neighborhood, we're doing as a courtesy to the residents, not as a requirement. But we will do the same mailing that we did this time.
Thank you.
But we have followed all the notice requirements, and this is not a public hearing item, it is just a replat.
Thank you.
And I guess one way, I mean, they can check the Planning Commission website for agendas.
There's no way that any item related to Grand Prairie will come back on any agenda without the same notice being done.
But it would be administrative item, I mean,
Right, but we provided notice of this meeting and the
As a
status of
courtesy.
the applications, and we will do it again to be consistent with that. I just want to try to reemphasize that 95 plats out of 100 is just coming to you and you're reviewing
Right.
the layout of the plat versus what the city codes are. It's a typical replat involves that amount of review, not the type of things that we're looking at today. Because
Thank you.
today we're revisiting all the decisions that were made in 2008 and 9.
thank you.
Mr. Sheppard wants to say something.
Mr. Sheppard?
I just wanted to make a point on this fire safety deal. Now, the entrance to Grand Prairie is a boulevard entry, and it was by design because they considered it 2 entrances and 2 exits, because it was the only safe, if you drive Cedar Ridge, it's the only safe area to make it, to pull into that. So what I'm meaning is it's a boulevard entry, so there's 2 streets running clear down to Phase 2. Does that make sense? So when we did Phase 2, this was determined that this was 2 entrances and 2 exits to the start of Phase 2. So if you look at that, that's part of the reason we have the boulevard entry is because of that. I don't know if that clears anything up, and I don't know if that jogged your memory, Dean, but that was the reason Phase 2 was allowed to go ahead, because we had 2 entrances and 2 exits down to where Phase 2 starts, because of the boulevard entry.
Where's the 2 exits?
For the purpose, yes, sir. So for the purpose of entry and exit, it's here.
But those aren't wide enough for 2 cars to go down. Only 1 car can go down.
I'm just telling you what
I'm saying, so it can't be 2 entrances and exits because only 1 car.
Didn't we just put a moratorium on this?
That's what they approved.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. Shall we move on to, looks like there's no preliminary discussion items still?
We have no preliminary discussion items for you at this time.
And then did we ever confirm whether Mr. Olson will represent us on Heritage Commission?
Mr. Olson was nominated to serve on the BZA.
Okay,
And he
good.
indicated that he would. It still requires a resolution to be approved by the city commission.
Thank you.
Did you watch the video?
Now it's time for a public forum, if anyone would like to talk about anything, whether it's related to the agenda or not.
I'm sorry, I have to do this. My name is Jan Boland. I live at 2203 Applewood right now, currently building a home at 1338 Bentgrass Drive. And my question is, if I understood everything that was being said, obviously this plat was done in 2008, 2009 with what the restrictions were at that point of access for safety equipment and so forth. In the meantime, those restrictions, those rules, whatever you want to call them, have changed. So when they changed, why did the city not look at that and say, this area doesn't meet current requirements for safety fire trucks? We need to look at doing something different. Now, did I understand everything that was said correctly? And if I did, is that a true and accurate question?
The fundamental rule of grandfathering, when it applies to building codes, zoning codes, every type of city code, the development that is in place, the codes that are in place at the time the development is built are what they have to comply with.
Even when safety is the issue. I understand grandfathering. I've been involved in projects that have been grandfathered. I know what that means, and I appreciate it, but
I hope everyone understands that this subdivision never would have been approved for a single house if there wasn't a design and an access easement in place for an emergency access second way in and out of the subdivision. It never would have been approved in 2008 or 2009. The only question that is being raised is a question of timing, which is a fair question. Why wasn't this improved emergency access road have to be built at the time that the very first house was built? And the answer to that is fairly simple, that there would have had to been a road not only built across the golf course, but a road built from the very north end of the subdivision all the way down to where the first phase of Bentgrass Drive ended. And in the first phase of the development, which has 34 lots in it, the fire marshal in place at that time, who was not the same person as the current fire marshal, determined that Phase 1 could be safely and adequately served by a single entrance, particularly because that single entrance had a divided entry, and it was more than likely that if there was a blockage, that it would block only one side and allow the other side to be used for emergency access.
okay, and I understand.
Phase 2 is a fairer question, but when you go back and look at it, it is clear that the expectation was that the access road and all the full connections would be made when Bentgrass Drive was complete.
Okay.
The
So
residents are saying that that is not acceptable, and then the other thing is that in the meantime, the International Fire Code was adopted that has language in there about how many homes can be built in a phase of a subdivision without a second access road in and out.
Okay.
That particular provision and language in the code was not in place at the time that the original Grand Prairie was developed.
Okay.
So if the code was in place, there never would have been 34 lots in Phase 1 because that would violate the code.
And I think you've said that enough. I wanted to clarify and make sure I understood, because all I know about building is I'm learning the last 6 months. But I wanted to make sure I understood correctly that there was one set of regulations when this subdivision was developed, platted, whatever term I need to use, and that changed in the interim. So my question was, if those restrictions changed and they were safety conscious, why would we not look at that?
Because the city doesn't, nor would you as a property owner, want us to retroactively enforce new codes. Because then you would
For
have
safety?
the city would come out and say, your house was built under the 2012 building code. But that building code's now been amended, and these 16 things about your house don't conform with the 2019 building code. Therefore, you need to go out and address all these items because your house doesn't comply. There are buildings built in Salina that are 100 years old, and they don't meet any building code. And the city does not go out and say, we're sorry, your building doesn't meet our current codes, please retrofit it, or go retrofit this house, because we apply the codes that are in place at the time that a structure is built or the development occurs.
Okay, all right, I think you've answered my question. Thank you.
That brings up a question for me. She's in the process of building her house,
I know, I was wondering that too.
and that's number 28 in the subdivision. Is that correct?
I don't have the number I only have the numbers for how many buildable lots are in each phase, and that's how we enforce that provision of the fire code.
But there's only 27 houses there now, and she should be 28.
We have our building permit, so I assume we're number 27. I don't know. I didn't count the homes.
Okay. So they could build 3 more houses.
Correct, and that's what was been said.
Is
Well, not now, they can't, because we have a moratorium on it.
Well, I guess, that's what I'm
Yes.
saying.
So there's no reason to speculate on that, is there?
No, what I've heard is it's unsafe to build any.
Exactly.
There's a belief that
And
it's
there's a
unsafe to
moratorium.
build any homes in Grand Prairie.
So it is complete.
Well, I didn't know if she
Until
would have
that
to
road's
stop her
complete.
building, but she's got her permit, so she can continue.
Yes. What I'm trying to say is that there were 34 homes in Phase 1.
Right.
And there wouldn't have been 34 homes approved in Phase 1 if the fire code limitation limiting the number of homes with one way in and out was 30. That was not in place
Right.
at that time. And the same applies to Stone Lake, which is out off of South Ohio. That one has 38 homes in Phase 1 with one way in off of Ohio. And that question was asked at that time, and in 2008, when that was approved, there was no limitation of 30 homes with one. That is a recent addition to the fire code that was not in place. And we do not retroactively apply codes after the fact to something that's already been approved.
I'm sorry, but if
Would you come to the mic, please?
I'm sorry to belabor this, but if you're going to remodel a home and you apply for a building permit, you have to bring that up to code.
Right.
You can't go into a 100-year-old home and then remodel it and not bring it up to code. So I don't think that that's a fair statement that says we're trying to retroact. All we're trying to say is now, from this point forward, just like you would get a building permit, just like you'd get a permit to put up a outbuilding or to remodel your home, it has to be to current code. Is that not correct?
You don't have to touch, if you're remodeling your kitchen and you are getting a building permit to remodel your kitchen, you don't have to go and remodel your back bathroom and remodel your
That's not
basement
what
and
I'm saying.
remodel other those
That's-
things because
that-
those are grandfathered in.
That's not what I'm saying. You're remodeling your kitchen, that kitchen has to be to code. I'm not saying you got to take your whole house. I'm just saying that what you apply for a building permit and a permit to remodel, a permit to put up a deck, to put up a building, that has to be to current code. I'm not saying your whole home.
I think I could take your analogy and say, yes, any building that's being built in the subdivision will need to meet code, but the subdivision as a whole met the code at the time it was approved as a subdivision.
Right, but any new home now does not meet that code, that current code. That would be the same thing, because it doesn't meet the code, because when the house was built, in the same analogy, 100 years ago, that code in place, yes. Then you go to remodel it, or again, put a shed up, whatever, it has to meet new code. It's the same thing.
Just the
We're adding.
kitchen, just the kitchen, not the rest of the house.
No, but if you put up a outbuilding, right, that has to meet code. That's what we're doing. We're putting another building in this area that has to meet the current safety requirements. It's that same analogy. Instead of on one lot, it's the development. So I'm saying that that's not a true statement, that we're trying to go retro. We're just saying that at this point right now, any new development needs to meet the code, and that's what we're saying. Thank you.
And I do understand, yeah, what you're saying. Any other public forum items? If not,
I move.
I second.
that was to adjourn. Wait a minute, we haven't approved it yet. All in favor, say aye. Aye. I'm gonna hit the-
No, that's what-
Thank you for
I was- I had
coming.
that position.